A mathematician stopped the mightiest military force on Earth, not with an army, but with mirrors and geometry. In 214 BCE, the Roman Republic sent a fleet and 30,000 soldiers to conquer Syracuse, a Greek city-state on Sicily. They had siege towers, battering rams, and the reputation of unstoppable conquest. What they didn't have was a plan for what happens when your enemy thinks like a physicist. The siege would last 3 years. Rome lost that war twice, once to walls and machines, once to a decision made under pressure by a man named Archimedes. Exhibit 1. Archimedes wasn't a general. He was born around 287 BCE in Syracuse, a mathematician, engineer, and inventor obsessed with the mechanics of levers, pulleys, and water displacement. He had no military training, no command experience, no reason to believe he could matter in a war. When the Roman general Marcellus arrived with his navy and siege equipment, the city's actual military leaders faced a choice: surrender or die. Archimedes made them choose a third option. He studied the Roman siege machines as they arrived. He watched their angles, their ranges, their blind spots. Then he built defenses that turned the harbor into a killing ground. Cranes mounted on city walls, grappling hooks dangling from wooden beams, would snatch approaching ships and either shake them to pieces or flip them over. Catapults firing stone projectiles. Walls designed to collapse inward on siege towers. Not a single Roman soldier he'd trained. Not a single weapon he'd personally forged. Just applied geometry. Exhibit 2. The numbers. Marcellus had numerical superiority, 30,000 troops versus Syracuse's civilian defenders. He had the best military reputation in the Republic. He had months to prepare. What he didn't have was an answer to a question Archimedes had already solved. How do you defend a fixed position against an overwhelming force when you can't fight force with force? For 2 years, the Roman assault failed. Ships were destroyed. Soldiers were killed before they got close to the walls. Marcellus couldn't land troops. He couldn't breach the fortifications. He couldn't starve them out because Syracuse had supplies. A general with absolute material advantage found himself trapped by the thinking of one man with no soldiers. But here's the decision under pressure that matters for your life. Archimedes couldn't rebuild those defenses forever. Materials ran out. Soldiers got tired. Cities starve eventually. He knew the siege would end. The question was how he used the time he had. Exhibit 3. The siege lasted 3 years because Archimedes understood something the Stoic philosophers would formalize in writing, that you cannot control external circumstances, only your response to them. Rome had legions. Syracuse had Archimedes. Rome had time, so did Syracuse. The difference was how each side used it. He didn't waste energy complaining that Syracuse was outnumbered. He didn't despair that Rome had more resources. He looked at what he actually controlled: his intellect, his access to tools and materials already in the city, and his ability to think in systems rather than individual battles. That's not heroism, that's focus. The defenses he built weren't magic. They were applied mathematics: leverage, angles, trajectories, mechanics. Every principle he'd studied for decades became a tool for survival. When Marcellus finally broke the siege in 212 BCE, it wasn't because his soldiers overcame Archimedes' machines. It was because a traitor opened a gate at night. Even then, the city held longer than any Roman conquest in memory. Archimedes died in that final assault, either killed by a Roman soldier who didn't recognize him or executed after capture. The historical record isn't clear. What's clear is this: he spent 3 years under siege with impossible odds, and he didn't fold. He built, he calculated, he responded. Now apply this to your life. You're not under military siege, but you are under pressure. You have constraints: time, money, energy, information you don't have. You have competition or obstacles that seem overwhelming. You have months, maybe years, to figure out a response. What are you building in that time? Archimedes didn't invent new physics. He applied existing knowledge to an unfamiliar problem. He studied what was in front of him. He asked, what can I actually control? What tools do I have access to? What happens if I combine them in a way no one's tried yet? That's the Stoic lesson, not resignation, not magical thinking, radical clarity about what's yours to influence. The siege of Syracuse proves something uncomfortable. You don't need more resources than your opposition. You need better thinking about the resources you have. Rome had an empire. Archimedes had geometry and time. He chose to invest his time in thought. That choice held back the mightiest military force on Earth for 3 years. When you're overwhelmed, you have 2 paths. Path 1, Accept that you're outmatched and surrender. Path 2. Spend the time you have left thinking deeply about the problem in front of you. Ask what you actually control. Build with that. Archimedes chose Path 2. He didn't win the war, but he won 3 years. For man under siege, that's a victory. The Stoics would write about this centuries later, how virtue lies not in the outcome, but in the decision to think clearly under constraint. Archimedes never read Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. He lived the principle anyway. When the world demanded he surrender, he calculated instead. That's not luck. That's a choice. Your siege is different. Your enemy isn't Rome. But the principle is the same. When you can't control the pressure, control your response to it. Study what's in front of you. Use what you have. Think in systems. Build. That's all Archimedes did, and it held. The siege of Syracuse wasn't won by the bigger army. It was decided by the man who spent his time thinking instead of panicking. That's the Stoic edge. Not control over circumstances. Control over what you do with the time you have left. Subscribe for weekly lessons from history on how ancient figures faced pressure the way you do, and what their choices teach us about resilience when the odds feel impossible. Subscribe for weekly lessons from history on how ancient figures faced pressure the way you do, and what their choices teach us about resilience when the odds feel impossible.